Something happened today that I want to walk you through very carefully, not because it is complicated, actually because it is remarkably simple once you see the full picture. And the reason most people are going to miss it is that the coverage will focus on the ceasefire extension on the diplomatic shuttle through Pakistan, on the seized vessels. All of that matters. But there is a single sentence that came out of Iranian state media today that I believe is more consequential than any of those developments, and I want to give you that sentence before I explain why. The commander of the IRGC's aerospace force issued a direct warning to Iran's Gulf neighbors, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the warning was this: if their land or their facilities are used by enemies to attack Iran, they should say goodbye to oil production in the Middle East region. That is not a diplomatic communique. That is not a general expression of displeasure. Alongside that statement, Iranian state media published a specific list of facilities, named oil fields, named refineries, named pipelines, spread across the entire Gulf. ExxonMobil and Dow chemical facilities in Jubail, Saudi Arabia. The Yanbu complex on the Red Sea coast, a facility handling around 250,000 barrels of oil per day. The Habshan-Fujairah pipeline built specifically to route Saudi oil around the Strait of Hormuz. ExxonMobil's Ras Laffan facility in Qatar, the Bapco refinery in Bahrain, the Fujairah storage hub in the UAE, the Al Ahmadi refinery in Kuwait, the Satorp refinery in Saudi Arabia, and the Manifa plant also in Saudi Arabia, one of the largest oil production facilities on Earth. Those are not abstract threats. Those are coordinates. Those are addresses. Those are industrial facilities that, between them, process millions of barrels of oil every single day. And Iran's military published that list through official state channels today, April 22, 2026. Now I want you to hold that in your mind while I give you the second fact. China has said nothing about it, not a press conference, not a foreign ministry readout, not a diplomatic call to Tehran urging restraint. China has not commented on the IRGC's explicit threat to destroy the oil infrastructure of every Gulf state that permits its territory to be used against Iran. And I want to spend this video explaining why that silence is the most important thing that happened in the Gulf today. Not the threat, the silence. Because the threat is what Iran said. The silence is what China is telling the Gulf states about what comes next, and what China is telling them without saying a single word is that they are alone. Let me start with what makes this specific threat categorically different from everything that has come before it. Because I think the instinct among commentators is going to be to process this as more IRGC rhetoric, another escalatory statement in a conflict that has been full of them. That instinct is wrong, and it is wrong for three distinct reasons. The first reason is specificity. Previous IRGC statements talked about Gulf ports in general, Gulf oil infrastructure in general, the region's energy supplies as a broad category. This statement is different. It names the Manifa plant in Saudi Arabia. It names the Bapco refinery in Bahrain. It names the Al Ahmadi facility in Kuwait. It includes capacity figures. When a military command publishes a target list with specific sites, specific capacities, and specific coordinates, it is not venting frustration. It is communicating operational readiness. It is saying, we have done the targeting work. The coordinates exist. The only remaining variable is the decision to act. The second reason is the condition. The IRGC's warning is explicit and binary. If Gulf states permit their territory or facilities to be used by Iran's enemies, meaning the United States and Israel, then their oil production ends. That condition, the statement implies, has already been met. The United States Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain right now. American forces operate from bases in Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE right now. The United States has been conducting military operations from Gulf bases since this war began on the 28th of February. The IRGC knows this. What the commander is communicating is that Iran has chosen not to act on this condition yet. That choice is presented as revocable. The third reason is timing. This threat was issued after the ceasefire was extended with no fixed end date, after 2 vessels were seized by the U.S. Navy, after Iran fired drones at American military ships in retaliation. This is not the opening bid of an escalation. It is the latest step on a ladder that Iran has been ascending since the beginning of this conflict, and each step has taken it higher than the one before. Before I get to the Gulf states' position, I want to add one more layer that most of the coverage is not giving enough attention. China is not the only major power whose posture matters here. Russia is playing a very different role, and in some ways a more sophisticated one. On the same day Iran published its target list of Gulf oil facilities Russia called Iran, Foreign Minister Lavrov and Foreign Minister Araghchi spoke directly. The Russian Foreign Ministry's readout of that call confirmed Russia's readiness to help facilitate agreements between Iran and the Arab states of the Gulf. The Iranian side, according to the same exchange, confirmed its readiness to ensure the unimpeded passage of Russian vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. 2 countries, in a single conversation, exchanged specific reciprocal commitments. Russia gets a Hormuz guarantee, Iran gets strategic backing, and that exchange happened on the very same day Iran was publicly refusing every other country's invitation to substantive talks. Iran has not said yes to Pakistan as a full negotiating partner, not to Turkey, not to Egypt. But Iran has already told Russia directly what will pass through the strait regardless of what happens with the ceasefire. Russia is not a neutral mediator. Russia is Iran's patron, and Russia is positioned so that almost any outcome benefits Moscow. If the conflict resumes, Russia's oil revenues continue to surge on the back of elevated global energy prices. Data from the International Energy Agency confirmed that Russia's oil export revenues nearly doubled in March compared to February, rising from just under $10 billion to $19 billion as global prices spiked due to the Hormuz closure. If a deal is reached and the strait reopens, Russia has positioned itself as a constructive actor that contributed to regional stability. Either outcome works for Moscow. Russia is making enormous sums from a war it is not fighting, and it now holds a written guarantee from Iran that its ships pass through Hormuz regardless. This is the geopolitical architecture surrounding the IRGC's threat. China is silent, buying Iranian oil, providing diplomatic cover at the Security Council. Russia is vocal in support of Iran, banking windfall revenues and extracting navigational guarantees. And the Gulf states are sitting between an American security umbrella that is real but strategically constrained and a China-Russia-Iran alignment that has no incentive for the war to end quickly on American terms. Now let me walk through the Gulf states' actual position because I think it requires precision rather than generalization. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain. These countries share a common structural reality. They host American military assets. Their security architecture, air defense systems, intelligence, naval presence depends on the American relationship at a level that is decades deep. Walking away from Washington is not a real option, but they are also watching Iran name their specific refineries and oil facilities as military targets, and they are watching America's response remain inadequate to the scale of what is being threatened. Saudi Arabia has been actively pressing Washington to end the naval blockade, not quietly suggesting it, but pressing because Riyadh has calculated that the blockade, by keeping economic pressure on Iran while simultaneously giving Iran's hardliners a domestic justification for threatening Gulf infrastructure, is making Saudi Arabia less safe, not more. Saudi Arabia wants this war to end. It wants Iran's target list to become irrelevant. And it believes the fastest path to that outcome runs through a negotiated deal, which means through ending the blockade as the price of getting Iran to the table. The UAE is in an additionally complicated position. It has been quietly building economic ties with China for years. It hosts significant Chinese investment. It has deliberately avoided positioning itself as explicitly anti-China, and that positioning reflects a calculated hedge, a recognition that in a world of great power competition, smaller states that pick sides too definitively pay a long-term price. The UAE has also now arrested 27 individuals accused of belonging to an Iran-linked cell that was allegedly planning sabotage operations inside the country. Iran condemned those arrests immediately, so the UAE is simultaneously hosting American forces, arresting Iranian agents, and watching Iranian missiles pointed at its refineries. And it is watching China say nothing. Qatar hosts the largest American airbase in the entire region. Its Ras Laffan complex is one of the largest liquefied natural gas facilities on Earth, handling a substantial share of global LNG supply. Ras Laffan was named specifically on the IRGC's target list. Qatar cannot remove the American base without dismantling its own security architecture. It cannot ignore the target list, and it cannot confront China, which is a major buyer of its LNG, about Beijing's silence. Qatar's mediation role is not just diplomatic instinct, it is Qatar's lever, the one tool that costs it nothing and that could, if successful, make all three of those pressures irrelevant by ending the war before any of them becomes a crisis. Kuwait has been quietly pressing for de-escalation since the first week of the conflict. Its Al Ahmadi refinery was named on the target list. Kuwait's geography makes it impossible to ignore Iran. Its entire oil sector makes it impossible to ignore the IRGC. Its only available tool is diplomatic restraint. Bahrain hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet. The Bapco refinery, Bahrain's primary oil processing facility, is named on the list. Bahrain cannot remove the Fifth Fleet. The fleet's presence is precisely what the IRGC is citing as justification for threatening Bahrain's oil production. Bahrain is being warned about something it has no power to change. These countries are not free to choose neutrality. Their territory is already part of the war's infrastructure. The IRGC knows this. The threat is designed specifically to make them feel the cost of a condition they cannot alter, which is exactly where China's silence becomes the central diplomatic fact. Here is why China's silence carries the weight that it does. China is not a passive observer in this conflict. It is the single largest buyer of Iranian crude oil. Tanker tracking data shows that roughly 11.7 million barrels of Iranian crude were moving toward China in the early weeks of this war, carried by vessels operating with their transponders off, conducting mid-ocean ship-to-ship transfers, and settling payments through banks outside Western financial networks. Iran's oil revenue has been damaged by this war, but it has not been severed. The gap between damage and collapse is the gap that China's continued purchasing maintains. China also used its veto at the United Nations Security Council in April, alongside Russia, to block a resolution that would have encouraged member states to work toward reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The resolution had been repeatedly weakened in the hope of securing abstentions rather than vetoes. It was weakened all the way down to asking only for defensive coordination. China and Russia vetoed it anyway. Iran never had to fight that diplomatic battle. It was won before it started. China's foreign ministry has called America's blockade of Iranian ports dangerous and irresponsible. China has consistently expressed support for dialogue, urged de-escalation, and backed the mediation process. And China's ambassador in Pakistan expressed full appreciation for Pakistan's efforts on the same day Iranian state media published the IRGC's target list of Gulf oil facilities, support for the mediator, silence on the threat. That combination is not accidental. It is a policy. China supports the diplomatic process because the diplomatic process keeps the ceasefire alive and keeps Chinese vessels moving through the strait. China says nothing about Iran's threat to Gulf oil infrastructure because saying something would require a choice. Either condemn Iran and damage a strategic relationship built over many years, or endorse the threat and create a confrontation with Gulf states that host hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese investment and provide around 30% of China's crude oil imports. So China says nothing and says it very deliberately. But here is what that silence communicates to the Gulf states. It tells them that when Iran acts on its target list, China will not intervene diplomatically to stop it. It will not call Tehran and say you have gone too far. It will not condemn strikes on Gulf oil infrastructure. It will express concern. It will call for restraint, and it will keep buying Iranian crude. Not that China supports the threat, but that China will not pay a meaningful cost to prevent it. For the Gulf states, that distinction is the most important diplomatic reality of this conflict. Let me introduce a framework that I think explains why this moment is structurally different from previous IRGC escalations. I call it the confidence ladder. Every time Iran tests a boundary and the consequences are manageable, Iran's confidence to test the next boundary grows. Iran closed Hormuz in late February. America could not fully reopen it by force. That is a rung. Iran allowed a ceasefire but kept collecting transit fees and restricting passage. America accepted that. Another rung. Iran's IRGC overruled its own foreign minister when he announced an opening of the strait, closing it again within hours. America extended the ceasefire anyway. Another rung. Iran fired drones at U.S. military vessels after the ship seizure. America reported no damage and continued negotiations. Another rung. And now Iran's IRGC Aerospace Force commander publishes a named target list of Gulf oil facilities. The rung above that is acting on it. Each rung has been possible because of the same underlying fact. China's continued oil purchases have ensured that the economic cost of climbing has remained below the cost of descending. Iran does not climb this ladder out of military confidence. Iran's military has been substantially degraded over 50-plus days of American strikes. It climbs out of strategic confidence, the confidence that it has a partner whose support makes the cost of each escalation survivable. And that partner's silence today, while Iran named over a dozen Gulf oil facilities as potential targets, is the clearest signal yet of where that confidence comes from. Because the Gulf states are not afraid of Iran, because Iran is militarily superior in the traditional sense. America has been bombing Iran since late February. Iran's Air Force, significant parts of its Navy, major elements of its missile infrastructure have taken serious damage. But Iran does not need air superiority to hit the facilities on its list. It needs drones. It has thousands of them. It needs cruise missiles. It has those too. And it needs to believe that the consequences of acting are survivable. China's oil purchases give Iran that belief. As long as that revenue stream holds, Iran can absorb the economic shock of almost any escalation it chooses. This is the bind that China has placed the Gulf states in, without firing a shot and without saying a single word. America is providing military protection, but America cannot protect Gulf states from the threat of Iranian strikes on their oil infrastructure without escalating the war to a scale that America itself has consistently declined to pursue. And China, the one country whose economic relationship with Iran could actually shift Tehran's cost-benefit calculation, has made its choice. And that choice is silence. The Gulf states understand this clearly. It is why Saudi Arabia is pressing hard for an end to the blockade. Not because Riyadh sympathizes with Iran's position, because Riyadh has done the math. If the blockade continues and Iran acts on its target list, Ras Tanura, Saudi Arabia's largest refinery, comes under direct threat. American air defenses will intercept some of what Iran fires, some will get through, and China will issue a statement expressing deep concern and calling on all parties to exercise maximum restraint. So watch what happens in the coming days. Watch Saudi Arabia's posture toward Washington. Watch whether Gulf states that have been publicly aligned with the American position begin making quieter, more accommodating signals toward Tehran. Watch whether any Gulf capital quietly approaches Beijing. not publicly, not on the record, to request diplomatic intercession or some form of assurance that its oil infrastructure will not become a casualty of a war it never chose to join. That conversation, if it happens, will not be announced. It will show up only in the absence of escalation and in subtle shifts of diplomatic language. But if you want to understand why the Gulf feels isolated today, genuinely isolated in the way that matters most, you do not need to look at what China said. You need to look at what China did not say. That silence is the answer. And in every Gulf capital right now, they hear it with perfect clarity.